Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining this CSOC session this afternoon. We'll now hand over to Charlotte Toma, who will provide an introduction to today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Tēnā koutou katoa, and a really warm welcome to all of you joining us today for this webinar. The CSOC Emerging Structural Engineers are really excited to host this webinar on wellbeing and diversity. These are two really big themes that impact everyone in different ways as part of their day-to-day life as engineers. We hope you've managed to grab yourself some lunch and are settled in to hear from Gloria, Michael, Max and I on these topics linked to our professional wellbeing as engineers. Up first, we're going to hear from Gloria Wang, a systems engineer at Beca. And she's going to talk to you about her graduate experience and how that influenced her sense of belonging in the industry. And then we'll hear from Michael Geddes down in Wellington at WSP. Almost said something completely different. He's a structural engineer with over 7 years of experience, and I really like to thank Michael. He's been very much involved in our ESC network and has led and chaired the Wellington chapter down there and really been involved in the CSOC group as a whole. And then finally, we'll hear from Max and I around some research that we've been doing looking at gender representation and rebalancing the industry from an engineering perspective. So again, I'd like to welcome you all. Hope you've got a coffee or a drink and some lunch, and introduce Gloria to take over.
Thank you, Charlotte. Can I just share my screen with you all? Can you guys see my screen?
Perfect.
Cool. Hello, everyone. I'm Gloria, and let me just start by saying that I am not a structural engineer. Actually, I'm a systems engineer working in the National Defence and Security sector in Beca. Thank you, Charlotte, for inviting me today. So 5 years ago, I was a graduate engineer, fresh out of uni, excited to begin my career, work on cool projects, and one day be seen as someone accomplished and respected in the industry. It was a good plan, but being the newbie, I was overwhelmed with the feeling that I wasn't good enough. I wasn't loud enough. I wasn't productive enough, not contributing enough. My lack of experience constantly made me doubt my competence and, frankly, my self-worth. And the more I shrunk, the less confident I was, and it was a vicious cycle. So today I'm going to share with you 3 areas of my life that played a part in the buildup of this insecurity. Looking back, these weren't things that were out of the ordinary. They are a normal part of my life, and which is why the influence was so subtle. Firstly, what's my goal? I love planning and having a to-do list, from the week of the things I need to get done to the meals I'm going to eat. You bet I had it all planned out. I also like to make long-term goals. And back when I was in school, the goal was simple: get good grades and find a job. And at the end of my internship with Beca, I was offered a graduate position. And so 21 years of hard work paid off in that moment. Everything in the first volume of my life was done. And volume 2 was about becoming a successful career woman. But there was only one problem. I didn't know how. And honestly, I didn't know what sort of career. Work life is not like school. There's no clear path, no tests. So what are the milestones? Is it a 1-year goal? Is it a 5-year goal? How long did I want to stay in a job? Did I want to remain an engineer forever? Should I do a postgrad? A plan to do well didn't give me any direction, and the inability to plan for my future meant I had nothing to drive me. I didn't have a purpose. Therefore, my day-to-day work, there was no motivation. Number 2, culture. Now, you don't have to be Asian to relate, but in many Asian households, we're told to work hard and don't rock the boat. My parents have always taught me to be respectful to my elders, and I pride these values. The problem was that in this mindset, I was still learning how to embrace life as an adult. I saw too many boundaries in the workplace that I was not allowed to cross. I didn't see myself on equal footing with other adults, especially those more senior than me. I struggled to move out of a one-up, one-down relationship and into a peer relationship with other adults. This left me timid and too anxious to speak because I wanted their approval. Too awkward to engage in lunch table conversations, too scared to raise questions in meetings. I just wanted to be seen as someone who was well behaved. And I thought the way to be that was to simply follow instructions. Thirdly, my environment. Not long after I started as a grad, I got sent away to Kawerau for 3 months. I don't know how many of you know where that is, but up to that point of my life, I sure didn't. I told myself living alone would be good, for independence, for growing up, but this was on a whole other level. It's a small rural town in central North Island with not much to do, even less in the middle of winter. There weren't many people at the plant I was seconded to, and the work was not stimulating. I felt disconnected with my family, my friends, and colleagues back home. And whenever my team lead called me from time to time to ask, how I was doing, the voice inside me wanted to tell him that I was lonely, but I was worried how they would interpret that. I don't want to be that grad who complained life was hard. I don't want to be looked down on or seen as weak. And so I would just say, I'm doing fine. But inside, I was sulking and actually harboring bitterness for being sent there. So without a clue what my goal was, a fear of talking to adults, and a deteriorating mental state, you can see why I was shrinking. The less I spoke, the more I let people make assumptions about me. And as time went by, the harder it became to change that perception. In my 3rd year, a senior I worked with sat me down one afternoon. He said, "Gloria, you're very polite and well-mannered. I can see your parents have taught you well. But I think you're holding back. You have a lot of thoughts, but you're afraid to speak. You should bark more." I was stunned. No one has ever told me to bark, ever in my life. He saw right through me, poking at the truths that I had buried away. The unmotivated, timid, insecure person was the total opposite of who I was back in uni. I never quite figured out how I got here, but I knew deep down this wasn't me. My eyes started welling up. I tried to talk about my struggles, but the tears choked back my words. Even without speaking, the look on his face showed that he understood. And in that small room, I didn't have to be what I thought others wanted to see. The guards came down and I faced myself, my fears, my troubles. And that girl was a mess, but she was the one that I wanted to live in. And in that raw and vulnerable hour on a random workday, I embraced authenticity. It takes strength and it takes courage to remain open-hearted and vulnerable in the world we live in today. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires self-acceptance. It requires you to let go of what people think, to let go of perfectionism, and to let go of comparing yourself. Be self-compassionate. Be willing to soften into the hard edges of life. Be brave and discover your deepest fears. A little over 2 years ago, I was filled with anxiety over everything I said and did. I worried how people would interpret my words and actions. So what's the best way to avoid being understood? Don't do anything. I always chose the easy way out. You were a flower growing under other people's leaves. Now you have your own space. Those were the words of my senior the week he retired. 2 years have passed since my meltdown in that small meeting room. And since then, a lot has changed. I've switched roles, taken on new challenges, And through it, I found new passions and purpose for my life. I love my job. I love the people I work with. I've grown comfortable standing up for myself. I question when I'm not sure. I stand firm for what I believe in. We can all think of an uncomfortable time where we just wanted to fit in. We can spend our lives trying to keep everybody liking us and nobody misunderstanding us. But in the end, it is us who burn out. If true belonging requires us to present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world, are we willing to strengthen ourselves by being vulnerable? I like to finish on a quote by Brené Brown. It's the reminder that our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. There will be many challenges awaiting you when you enter the workplace. Don't be afraid of them. Don't be afraid of risk, to be different, to be vulnerable, and share your honest thoughts. Because in those moments of struggle are also your moments of courage. Your choices are powerful and they are meaningful because you made them and they represent you. Thank you. And now I'd like to pass the time to Michael.
That was awesome. So many great tips in there. And also thank you, Charlotte, for inviting me to present today. This is a presentation that I first gave at the CSOC conference last year. Although the slides still say 2021 conference, I've pretty much reworked it, so hopefully improved it. So yeah, and just to introduce myself, again, I'm a structural engineer with WSP in Wellington. I've been here 7.5 years. Currently studying towards a master's at the University of Canterbury, part-time as well. First, I would like to there you go, sorry. First, I'd like to look at what we mean by health and well-being. Someone has kind of defined well-being as being these five pillars, which are physical, emotional, social, financial, and career. So our physical health is the obvious one, I guess. It's our ability to, our health, our ability to move, our energy levels, our quality of sleep and nutrition. Then the emotional pillar is all about our thought life, how we respond to stress, and so on. Social pillar is quite important as well because as humans, we're wired to have interaction with each other. We can't really exist on our own. And then finally, our finances and our career or our workplace can have a big impact on our well-being as well. We can also think about well-being as a continuum where it's not you're kind of sick or you're healthy. You can be somewhere in the middle, like on this graph here. And our well-being can fluctuate day to day and week to week. And some days are a challenge. That's just a fact of life. And it's okay to be in the kind of struggling zone sometimes where you might be tired, not sleeping well, maybe just not feeling 100% at work. But the key is you don't want to stay in that area. You want to be making sure you have ways of getting out and getting towards the thriving and excelling side of the curve. And I can relate to this just this week. I started work on Monday, I was fine. But then by midday, I was kind of struggling to look at my screen. I got a bit dizzy. And so I took a few hours off. I just put it down to being quite busy at the moment and having university studies as well, and it just kind of built up. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's okay to have some days where you're not 100%. By the way, I understand we might have a few university students on the call, so welcome to you, and I hope your exams go well, and I hope you get something out of this. A couple of quotes here about wellbeing that I really like. One from the World Health Organization and one from a psychologist. And they both talk about the importance of feeling productive and fruitful, making a contribution to our communities, and finding meaning and purpose. So if we can find purpose, in our work, and be productive, that's really going to help our well-being. And as engineering professionals, I believe that our work is completely meaningful and should contribute and not detract from our well-being. But that's not to say that our work isn't challenging. It definitely can be. One of our main challenges is that we are, by nature, engineers are problem solvers. So we're going to get given people's problems. And when we're solving those problems, we're constantly having to make tricky decisions and judgments in our designs. Another challenge that we face is that our work is quite fast-paced. Clients and contractors want an answer right away, a lot of the time. And as I'm sure you'll be aware, our construction industry is experiencing a huge boom. And as structural engineers, we are heavily involved in that. We are delivering multiple projects side by side. It's easy to get caught up in the speed and hustle of our industry and start to neglect our well-being. And a final challenge is just starting out in the workplace. For me personally, I hadn't had any internships at a consultancy, so day one of my job, that was the first time I'd been in a design office, and it's a very different environment to university. So many things to learn. So I think we need to be mindful that graduates can be vulnerable to these types of stresses, and as Gloria has just described to us really well, there's a whole lot of challenges in consulting. You could be sent to Kauro, all sorts of things. And I personally experienced some of these struggles as well as a graduate. So I'll just share a bit about my experience in this area. When I started at what was Opus at the time, we had quite a few large projects on. We were designing a hospital, a new hospital building, a hotel, and a large school building. And I was very fortunate to be involved in some capacity in all of those projects in my first couple of years. Unfortunately, one of our senior engineers moved back to the UK, and he was also acting as my mentor. And I kind of picked up a bit of the work that he was doing. Obviously, I had support, but even so, there were times where I felt out of my depth and overwhelmed by the work. I thought that people were too busy to talk to me because everyone was busy. I thought that I had to kind of just learn everything and get the jobs done, I suppose. But yeah, I guess kind of similar to what Gloria shared, I didn't speak up. My nature, that wasn't my nature. However, that's not at all what we should do. We should, whenever we're challenged, we should speak to a manager or a senior. So basically, I got quite overwhelmed and experienced a loss of confidence and wasn't able to make even simple decisions in a design. And I had to take some time off work. I think it was a few weeks. And I came back to work in a part-time capacity and then got back full-time. I was fortunate to have two managers that went out of their way to support me, and I honestly wouldn't still be a structural engineer without them. So I just encourage you that even though you're busy and your manager or your senior is busy too, they're never too busy to help you. Just put your hand up whenever you need to. Thought I'd just reflect on how we're doing as a profession in the space of wellbeing. And some of my more experienced colleagues have told me that we kind of used to have a culture of just getting the job done at whatever it took, working quite long hours over time, and there wasn't really a focus on wellbeing at all. But I think there's been a noticeable shift in this area in the last few years, with all of the big organisations now having wellbeing plans, and there are good things happening. So Engineering New Zealand have published a number of excellent resources in the past couple of years, a couple on the screen, series of YouTube videos on study life to working life, which will give you a good idea of what to expect when you're starting in the workplace. There's also a bunch of wellbeing resources on the Engineering New Zealand website. So that's all positive. Unfortunately, there still is the odd bad news, I suppose, and I found this article a few weeks ago, excuse me, which highlights problems in the construction industry. And yeah, this is specifically for the construction sector, so not us as consultants, but it is still relevant. According to the statistics, construction workers are twice as likely to take their own lives than be killed in a workplace accident, which is incredibly sobering. And I won't dwell on that, but I guess all I want to say is there are good things happening, but we still need to continue to improve in the construction sector and the consultancy sector. And I guess this just goes back to my previous point about how busy we are in the construction sector. And so we really need to be mindful about taking care of ourselves and our colleagues. Just to see, I'm just going to clear my throat. So now I'd like to look at what do we mean by healthy, and one thing is just, well, we're healthy when we look out for each other. And this is a quote from my employer's mental health plan. And in a nutshell, it talks about, just being there for each other. And if we do that, we are well on our way to creating healthy workplaces. To me, a big aspect of wellbeing is remaining connected. And although we have these open plan offices, it's still quite easy to just put your head down and bury yourself in your work without interacting with other people. And as humans, we tend to get caught up in our own thoughts when we're alone, and that's why it's so important to keep connected. So one simple strategy for wellbeing is just to keep our lines of communication open. So have you talked about that tricky project with someone today? Or, instead of just keeping it to yourself and trying to solve it on your own? Or have you asked someone how they're doing today? Another aspect of being healthy is keeping boundaries between work and home life. And the shift towards working from home has really blurred this boundary, I think. And obviously that's been challenged by COVID and having to work from home a lot more. And so, especially for our colleagues in Auckland, who I really sympathise with, because many of us don't have a home office, it is a challenge to achieve a mental and physical separation from our work sometimes. I know someone here at WSP who actually puts a sheet over their desk so that it's kind of out of sight completely, which is quite a nice idea. So we should also be mindful about keeping to a schedule, because if you're working at home, you don't have that cue of seeing people leave the office to know that it's time to go kind of thing. And so you could easily keep typing away at home, and before you know it, it's 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. So however you choose to do it, I'd just encourage you to be intentional about switching off at the end of the day. Being healthy also looks like taking plenty of breaks and having that balance in your life. So you can ask yourself, what do you enjoy doing, and what develops you as a person? Personally, I'm an active relaxer, so for me it is sports and getting outdoors. For you, it might be walking your dog or reading a novel. There's plenty of options out there. And these sorts of activities force us to drop what we are doing and reset and get refreshed for the next day or the next part of your day. And some other things, smiles and encouragement. I'd say don't underestimate what a smile and a few words of encouragement can do to someone's day. And taking an interest in your co-workers and being available to them can make all the difference. And I think especially about graduates who really need that person-to-person interaction to learn and develop in their roles. And just generally building rapport with people, I think, helps build our wellbeing. Our day-to-day interactions with our colleagues set the tone for our office and provide support lines for when things get tough. So in conclusion, I just want to say it's really important to look after yourself. And if you're having an issue at work or in your personal life, it is much better to raise it early on than to let it carry on and get to that point where, for me, I had to take time off work. For Gloria, it was that meeting where she broke down. Ideally, we don't want you to get to that place. So just be mindful of talking early. My other encouragement is that this stuff is really common. I hope that by hearing from Gloria and I, you'll see that it's normal. And when I presented this last year, I had several people come up to me at the conference saying that they'd had similar experiences. So it's very common. And it's okay to have challenges. The important thing is to learn from them and to move forward as a stronger person, which I think Gloria spoke about so well. And I just encourage you to reflect on your own personal well-being and perhaps think of one or two small changes that you could make to help your well-being. If you feel like you need support, please talk to a friend, whānau, or a trusted colleague, or maybe your work as an employee assistance program. There's also call or text to 1737 to speak to a trained counsellor. And finally, your GP will be able to direct you to several resources as well. So thank you very much for listening. I look forward to some questions at the end, but I'll now pass over to Charlotte and Max for our final presentation.
I'm still muted. Thank you, Michael. That was great, and also so brave to share your story, and I really think everyone will have valued that. The other thing I just wanted to say was amazing, Gloria. Your story was fantastic, and I'm sure that resonated with a lot of people. I'm just going to attempt to share mine, and funnily enough, as it always happens, the PowerPoint has disappeared from the share screen. Why is that? There we go. Sorry. There we go. That was annoying. Okay, so here we are. Today, Max and I are going to present some research that we led back in 2020 on the factors affecting the balancing of gender representation in the engineering industry. Some of the content here is quite confronting, and I will say that it has, I guess it's not the uplifting, it doesn't follow as well from the beautiful uplifting stories of Gloria and Michael. But at the same time, if we don't talk about this stuff, then it's very hard to make change. So just with that in mind, we will get into it. I do want to acknowledge Lucy Devonshire and Hannah Davidson, who were our research assistants through this project as well. So women are underrepresented throughout all areas of engineering in all different disciplines. And, this probably isn't a surprise to you if you are an engineer or a student engineer. If you look around the room, it is often dominated by males. Currently, the proportion of women in engineering industry or in engineering education is rising, with 27% of our first year intake into the University of Auckland being women. However, even with active and focused programs aimed at increasing this percentage, it has stayed below 30% continuously. So the goal has been 33%, but we really haven't been able to shift it to over 27%. Although women are gaining representation in the industry and at the university, this is not yet reflected throughout the different levels within industry. And if we have a look at this figure reproduced from the Engineering New Zealand Remuneration Survey in 2020, we can see that the graduate mix is still sitting just above 30% women, but this sharply declines as you go up the career ladder. And we end up right at the technical manager, general manager level at below 10% women. This is in line with international research and emphasizes this leaky pipeline concept present in engineering industry. I do want to acknowledge that we have some fantastic and wide-ranging initiatives aimed at increasing the visibility of engineering as a career for women, and most of these target high school students. And we're really looking here is to increase the proportion of for future engineers to be women. We still need to get them into the door of university though, however. It is very much my strong feeling though, that until we address the issues around the retention and promotion of women that are in engineering, that I foresee that we're really going to struggle to move this imbalance. So our research focuses on factors that affect women's career progression in engineering and how this compares to men. We wanted to look at the statistics that's thrown around how many engineers are leaving the industry and if this in fact varies by gender. We also wanted to determine barriers within the industry for women and potential initiatives that could be implemented for improving gender representation. So to do this, we conducted some research using a threefold approach. And the research was focused on engineers in their early stages of the career. So we looked at those that had graduated from between 2011 and 2017. We wanted to understand these attrition rates across gender. And so to do this, we used a list of University of Auckland graduates from 2011 to 2017 to collect employment data from LinkedIn. Information was recorded from 300 men and 294 women to gain an insight into what engineering graduates are doing now and whether they have in fact stayed in engineering. Secondly, we were interested in comparing how factors identified in past research as being key to professional success affect those currently working in the engineering industry and whether there are in fact other factors. The questionnaire was sent to about 1,300 men and women who graduated within that period identified to understand their experiences in the engineering industry. And we had an overall response rate of around 20%. And I just wanted to highlight that that 20% was almost exactly evenly split between women and men. And we use these responses to compare the impact of these factors across gender. And then finally, to assist in interpreting the data collected through the questionnaire and understand how these factors actually present themselves in industry, we ran 6 focus groups of women engineers conducted across different companies within New Zealand. So starting off looking at this LinkedIn data and the attrition rate, Since 2011, women have made up more than 20% of University of Auckland engineering graduates. Now, this differently varies across the different specialisations, with civil, particularly environmental, being on the higher side, and then right down to mechanical and mechatronics being in the lower side, but always more than 20% going into industry. From the LinkedIn survey, we found that approximately 18% of these women who had left engineering industry within the first 9 years following their graduation. And this was in comparison to around 11% of men. Now, if we have a look at the questionnaire, so this questionnaire was set up and sent to those that are still in the engineering industry, and we wanted to look at these particular factors and their experiences with them. So these factors were identified as having an impact on professional success, and they were separated into two groups within the research. We had societal bias, which were challenges caused by bias influencing workplace experience, and company culture factors, which can be controlled more easily through administrative measures. So within the societal biases, we were looking at whether the participants had experienced them and to what extent. And within company culture, we were looking at the impact and the accessibility of these factors in terms of their career progression. So the questionnaire participants were asked if they had experienced these challenges in their professional career within the engineering industry. And their answers, or they were given the opportunity to answer between never, sometimes, half the time, most of the time, all the way up to always. So the part that I'm going to focus on today is the societal bias factors, and then Mac's going to look at the company culture. So if we have a look here, the societal biases that we investigated were gender stereotypes, workplace harassment, and career discontent. So the statistics, the numbers come from the questionnaire, whereas the quotes and the overlaying thinking comes more from the focus group research. And I also note when I was putting this together, I couldn't help but put some of my own feelings in here. So I'll try to identify those as well. So if we start off by looking at the gender stereotype, we can see that 92% of the women who responded to the survey responded that they had experienced gender stereotypes sometimes or more frequently, compared to 56% of men. The interesting statistic here is that we can see that large orange bar, or the orange bars versus the grey bars, are representing almost half of that 92% being half of the time or more they're experiencing gendered stereotype. The interesting thing from the focus group was that most women, or many women, didn't necessarily recognise discrimination or negative experiences as barriers to their career progress, and they felt pressured to cope with it, seeing it as inevitable. As they saw it as inevitable, they didn't consider it as a barrier, rather saying it's just something that I have to deal with that other people don't, and they see it as it's not really worth getting upset about. And someone also mentioned that it was almost normalized in her field to see other contractors putting up pictures of naked women. Another aspect of this gendered stereotype is that some women mentioned feeling like other women were likely to put them down. In the questionnaire comments and focus group, it was brought up multiple times, with women displaying bias against other women and themselves, as well as more senior women showing negative behaviour, such as putting other women down. Unfortunately, we have seen this also reflected in the media recently. Along the notes of gender stereotype, we see this issue around confidence. Throughout the questionnaire, comments and focus groups, we noticed that women often feel that they need to change their personality to work in the engineering industry by portraying more confidence, as evidenced by this quote down here. Some participants mentioned their lack of confidence is their biggest obstacle to getting ahead, and for some, it made them want to leave the industry. On the flip side, mentorship was raised multiple times as enabling some women to gain confidence and to know that somebody was there to support them. And this is where it reminded me of a really great quote that pops up often, and that is to surround yourself with women who would mention your name in a room full of opportunities. And I think we could easily take out the women in there and surround yourself with people who would mention your name in a room full of opportunity. So if we look now at workplace harassment, we can see on the whole that women are experiencing workplace harassment more than men in the survey, with 44% of men experiencing harassment compared to 53% of women. Unfortunately, both of those statistics are really high and not great. In one particular focus group, a woman was asked if she'd experienced any gender-related barriers, to which she said no. The conversation continued, the focus group question continued, and around 20 minutes later, she described in depth how she'd had to change teams due to sexual harassment, even explicitly saying that it had slowed down her career. One woman mentioned that having senior women around to help manage instances of workplace harassment can enable younger women to deal more easily with challenges they are facing in the workplace. So what we're seeing here is that unfortunately our women in engineering are becoming so used to harassment and gender stereotyping that they're brushing it off, that it's not even a thing, it's not even a barrier, and it's just something they have to deal with. My other issue with this comment here is that there's not always senior women or senior allies around to support you in these situations. I think we all want to think that we would call out harassment or bias or confront inequality if we saw it. But is that the case when you really do come face to face with it? And if you overlay any issues around role and power imbalance, that makes it much harder. The other aspect of workplace harassment response that was raised multiple times was this issue or notion of HR. So a lot of participants mentioned that they were hesitant to take complaints to the HR department. They were concerned that it might be blown out of proportion, that they might not deal with it in the way that they would like, or that it would require a demanding and lengthy process. One woman mentioned that she was sexually harassed twice in her company, and after the second time she went to HR. But she didn't feel supported by those that she approached, causing her to drop the complaint as it was too time-consuming and too stressful. Another woman mentioned others becoming aware of her complaint to the HR and it affecting how her peers were perceiving her in the company. This concern around HR appropriately dealing with complaints is quite consistent and I think quite concerning. And if you in fact look at what an HR department should be, it exists to help the employee thrive, to create a safe and productive work environment. And I think it's quite telling that it doesn't seem to be what it's doing, especially for women in engineering. Another aspect of workplace harassment is how and when we deal with it. So this idea of confrontation. So from previous overseas research, it was found that women often say that they will confront sexism, but in reality, they really do. Women don't want to be characterized as bossy or difficult to work with when they confront sexism or confront or raise an issue, again, whether it's bias, inequality, or harassment. Women in this particular study mentioned their reluctance to deal with inappropriate comments. Their uncertainty of how their colleagues will perceive them meant they didn't want to confront their peers. And to me, this makes sense, and especially if you overlay it with performance reviews with a 360-degree peer feedback style. We're often living in this culture of not wanting to be a problem maker, being a problem solver. So if you are the person that speaks out, how do you wear that brush? The other aspect of it is it a safe space to even call it out? Or will they just turn it back on you? Oh, it's just how you interpreted it. They didn't mean it that way. It was mentioned in the survey that some interpersonal skills training could help everyone deal with confrontation. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit around career discontent. And I think this statistic is probably the key one from a lot of our research. We're seeing a huge level of career discontent, and it's not got any variation by gender. So career discontent is often in the literature reviewed or seen as a contribution from both company culture and societal bias factors. Here we're seeing that over 84% of all engineers reported some level of dissatisfaction. So sometimes or more feeling dissatisfied with their career. This is a highly concerning statistic, and one that Max and I will be looking into further with further research. Women experience career discontent at a higher rate than men, with 43% of women reporting experiencing career discontent half of the time or more, compared to approximately 27% of men. And within this focus group, participants cited themselves or their colleagues as leaving the engineering industry due to career discontent, as evidenced by this quote here. So I'm going to hand over to Max now to talk you through the company culture work.
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, so I'll try to keep this relatively brief just so there's time for questions at the end. So we're going to move into the company culture grouping. Now, within the company culture grouping, we looked at things that are affected by administrative measures or company policy, as Charlotte previously stated. So these are things that can be effectively controlled by the employer. There were 9 items that we looked at in this grouping. Those included leadership opportunities, mentorship, access to role models, workplace flexibility, parental leave, pay transparency, networking opportunities, and then also career development. And we actually broke career development into technical skills development and then more general professional skills development. And for each of those factors, we asked the participants, how has the access to that factor impacted their career? And then how satisfied are they with their level of accessibility to that factor in their professional career? So there's a lot of factors here, so I'm not going to talk about results for all of them. So those bold ones there are the ones we're going to talk about. These were selected because the participants indicated that they were most important and they most reflected the demographic of practicing engineer that responded to the survey. Cool. So we'll dive into role models initially. Before I start going through these slides, just to give you an idea of how they're set up. So if you don't want to listen to me talk and you just want to look at the slide, the plot on the top gives the impact on the career. The plot on the bottom indicates their satisfaction with accessibility to that factor. Responses shown on the left in orange and red tend to be more negative. Responses shown on the right in blue are more positive. And then at the bottom, there's some quotes from the focus groups or additional comments from the survey to support some of these findings. So looking at role models initially, it's pretty clear if you look at that top plot that people generally felt that role models positively impacted their career. So both men and women thought that role models positively impacted their career progression, with between 45% and 50% of all participants indicating that. When you look down at satisfaction with accessibility, that's a little bit of a different story. You can see that a fairly significant number of women were not satisfied with their access to role models. That was sitting at about 25%, relative to about 11% of their male counterparts who were not satisfied with their access to role models. In the comments in the questionnaire, some men acknowledged that role models could play a significant role in improving diversity in gender and ethnicity. And then, oh yeah, already changed. And then women mentioned in the focus groups how important it is to have role models because seeing women in leadership positions gives them encouragement and confidence that they someday can to progress into those leadership positions. Moving on to mentoring. Charlotte? Cool. So we see kind of a similar situation with mentoring. So if you look at the top right of the plot, a significant number of participants indicated that mentorship programs had positive impacts on their careers, really, really high percentages. So 60% of women and around 56 to 57% of men said that access to mentoring was really important and had a positive impact on their career. But again, when you look at satisfaction with accessibility, only a little bit more than 30% of participants were actually satisfied with their access to mentorship, and a little bit less than 20% of both men and women were dissatisfied with their accessibility to mentorship. And one thing to note is a lot more women than men were strongly dissatisfied with their access to mentorship. Multiple women in the focus group cited multiple women in the focus group cited that mentors had a huge influence on their career, and that they actually stayed in engineering when they had considered leaving because of the great mentors that they had. And that's consistent with Michael's story, I think, a little bit. It was also brought up that both formal and informal mentorship programs are really, really useful and positive. So a company doesn't necessarily have to have like an official mentorship program. If they have something unofficial, if like unofficial mentoring is part of their company culture, that can be really positive. Moving on to leadership opportunities. So leadership opportunities somewhat broke the trend of mentorship and role models. You can see that significantly more women than men indicated that access to leadership opportunities had a positive impact on their career. So 55% of women compared to 45% of men said it had positively impacted their career. But again, when you look at access to leadership opportunities, people tend to be fairly dissatisfied with their access to leadership opportunities, with 15% of women saying that they're dissatisfied with their access, and a little over 10% of men. I should note that in the additional comments in the survey, both women and men indicated, a significant number of both women and men indicated that they had a desire for more leadership opportunities. And one woman mentioned that potentially there should be more support for women getting into these leadership opportunities due to the gender inequality in leadership in most engineering firms. Moving on to technical skills development. So this one's really interesting. So this is technical skill development opportunities. What's really interesting about this is there's no disparity between the responses for men and women in any of the categories. So if you look at all the plots, both positive and negative, satisfied and dissatisfied, men and women had very similar opinions. Over 60% of both men and women thought that access to technical skills development opportunities was really important for their career progression. And 40% of all participants indicated that they were satisfied with their access to technical skills development opportunities. And within the focus groups, there were some fairly mixed opinions. Some people said there was almost too many technical skills development opportunities. Some people said there wasn't enough. And some people said that they weren't formal enough. So maybe they could formalize that a bit. Moving into professional skills development opportunities. So this is really similar to technical skill development opportunities. You can see that both women and men had very similar opinions, both in terms of impacts and satisfaction with accessibility. The percentages are almost identical across all of those. Within the focus groups, we asked about resources or professional development initiatives that would help improve career progression. And both men and women, the focus groups were just women, indicated that diversity training to improve awareness around unconscious bias would be useful, and interpersonal skills training to manage conflict with confrontation between coworkers would be useful. And then on to the final factor that we're going to talk about. So this one's really interesting because of all the factors that had the most negative responses in terms of both impact and satisfaction with accessibility, both for men and women. So you can see in the top plot there that a very significant number of women said that a lack of pay and career transparency had negatively impacted their career, with 15% of women, and a high percentage of that saying it strongly negatively impacted their career, compared to a little over 5% of men. And if you look at the satisfaction with accessibility to pay and career transparency, or what you need to progress in your career, a very, very high number of women expressed dissatisfaction, with over 20% of women compared to less than 10% of their male counterparts. I should note that although significantly more women, we can be done with pay and career transparency. Let's just move on to supportive managers and teams. So finally, I want to mention a factor that wasn't that we actually didn't officially include in the survey, and that's supportive managers and teams. This is a factor that a whole bunch of people brought up in the additional comments in the survey. Many women cited that their managers had huge influence on their career progression, both positively and negatively. So on the positive side, where managers treated women like part of the team or just one of the engineers, women indicated that they tended to feel more comfortable in their role as an engineer. However, within the focus groups, it was brought up a few times that some managers didn't seem to know how to manage women, and they ended up giving them more administrative tasks than their male counterparts. And so just some final thoughts before I pass it off to Charlotte to conclude the presentation. Of all the factors we just looked at, I think it was pretty clear that there's some serious disparity between men and women, with women generally feeling more negatively impacted by these factors and less satisfied with their accessibility to these factors. And I think that this data gives companies an opportunity to perform some self-reflection and see what they're doing in the space of these factors to begin to address the gender imbalance that we see here in New Zealand in engineering. So I'll hand it back to Charlotte now.
Thanks, Max. And sorry for my terrible slide changes for you. So on all of that, rather than making our own conclusions, we are leaving you here with a couple of quotes from our participants. I think some of you will have really connected with a lot of that, and others that you might be struggling to. I guess my thought to those out there that would like to be allies or to be supportive of women in their career is just going to have a chat to them about what's going on for them at the moment, or in the past even, and what they'd like to change in the future. So just as a final, very selfish plug, from this work and from the New Zealand Society for Earthquake Engineering drive to increase women in earthquake engineering and to support the women that are currently in the industry, we are running a Advancing Women in Engineering and Consulting and Construction Symposium in November in Auckland, and it's called Reshaping the Industry Through the Collective Voice of Women. And really the goal here is that there is a lot of great work, or there's a lot of great talk out there about making change in our industry to increase diversity, to increase feeling safe in the industry and allow women to progress into leadership. But a lot of this stuff is being driven from above, and the intention of the symposium is to allow the women in the industry to share their voice, to share their experiences, and to use their experiences to help drive these initiatives. So if you are a woman engineer out there and you'd like to attend, please keep an eye out for this. And if you have colleagues in your offices, please let them know that this is coming and the advertising will be out soon.